I was making dinner when a police officer knocked on my door. "Ma'am, your son was in a car accident and died an hour ago." "That was impossible. No, my son is upstairs asleep." The officer looked confused. I led him to the room. Then he drew his gun. "Ma'am," he told me in a tense voice, "step away from him. That is not your son. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached." I'm in my small kitchen preparing dinner with nimble hands. The old radio on the shelf plays a sad old song, the kind my husband Michael loved before he passed away 10 years ago. I glance out the window and see the rain coming down harder. The drops splash onto the gas stove. "Oh no," I murmur as I close the window. I don't want the wind to put out the flame. Tonight's dinner is just for me. Daniel, my son, just got home from work, soaked from the afternoon downpour. About 20 minutes ago, Daniel came into the house, leaving a trail of mud from his shoes on the tile floor. He didn't say much, just walked past the kitchen and put his hand on my shoulder. "Mom, I'm exhausted," he said in a deep voice, as if he'd been running all day. "I think I'm going to turn in early." "I have a meeting tomorrow." I looked up and noticed his eyes were red, probably from lack of sleep. "Remember to change out of that raincoat. You're soaked to the bone," I said, my tone a mix of scolding and affection. He nodded without much interest and dragged his feet towards his study upstairs, where he usually stays typing on the computer until late. I watched him go, thinking how that tall, thin body I used to carry in my arms now looked so heavy. I had just set the plates on the table and was about to sit down to eat when the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the rain, sharp and cold, and it startled me. Who could it be at this hour? I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Outside were 2 police officers, one holding his cap and the other a notebook. Their raincoats were soaked and dripping on the porch. The taller one, with a stern face, introduced himself as Lieutenant Miller. He looked at me with a heaviness in his eyes and said in a somber voice, "Ma'am, we are deeply sorry to inform you that your son, Mr. Daniel, passed away in a traffic accident an hour ago." I felt like I'd been hit in the head. I stood there paralyzed, my hand still on the doorknob. "That can't be," I managed to say, my voice breaking. "He's upstairs sleeping." Miller frowned and exchanged a look with his partner. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "Of course I am," I almost shouted. "I spoke with him less than an hour ago." My heart was pounding 1,000 miles an hour, like it wanted to burst out of my chest. Daniel had just been here in the kitchen with his hand on my shoulder. How was this possible? Miller motioned to his partner and then turned back to me. "We need to verify it to be sure. Could you take us to his room?" I nodded, my head spinning. "He just went up a little while ago. He must be fast asleep," I murmured, as if to convince myself. I opened the door wide, invited them in, and led them upstairs with trembling steps. The house is small with few rooms, so it didn't take us long to reach the door to Daniel's room. I knocked gently twice. "Daniel, honey." There was no answer. I pushed the door open and saw the dim yellow light from the night lamp illuminating a lump under the covers. "See?" I said, pointing to the bed with relief. "There he is sleeping." But Miller raised a hand to stop me. He drew his gun and said in a low but firm voice, "Ma'am, please step away from him. That's not... Okay, step back, let me check." Panic set in and I backed away towards the door, not understanding what was happening. Miller approached and yanked the blanket off forcefully. Underneath was nothing but the sunken pillow, and on the side a jacket and several towels arranged to simulate the shape of a person. I stood there, my mouth open, unable to say a word. The other officer looked at me with suspicion. "Are you sure you saw Mr. Daniel?" I was trembling, holding onto the doorframe. I spoke to him less than an hour ago. I heard him say he was going to sleep. My head was buzzing as if someone was squeezing my heart. Where was Daniel? If that wasn't him, then who was in the kitchen, who put their hand on my shoulder and spoke to me in that tired voice? Miller whispered something into his radio, then turned to his partner. "Possible setup. Take notes." He looked at me, the tension in his face slightly lessened but still serious. "Ma'am, please join us in the living room. We need to talk a little more." I nodded, but my feet didn't want to move. I looked again at the empty room, the night lamp still on, illuminating a cold bed. My heart sank. Daniel. My son. The person I love most in this world. Where had he gone? If he wasn't here, then what was happening? I sank into the old living room armchair, clutching a cup of tea that had gone completely cold. The warmth from a little while ago had turned into a chill that seeped into my bones. My mind was foggy, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The rain outside had subsided, but each drop falling from the roof to the patio sounded like a blow to my heart, one after another. The house, already small, seemed to want to swallow me with its silent shadows in the corners. I looked towards the staircase, where the light from Daniel's room lamp still peeked through a blurry reminder that my son was no longer there. Lieutenant Miller sat across from me in the wooden chair Daniel used to have breakfast with me. He opened his small notebook. His gaze was piercing, but his voice remained polite. "Ma'am, could you tell me exactly the last time you spoke with Mr. Daniel?" I took a deep breath, trying to anchor my mind in reality. I looked at the wall clock. The hands had just passed 9 o'clock. I answered, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. He had just gotten home from work. He said he was tired and was going to sleep. I even told him to change out of his raincoat because he was soaked. Miller nodded, wrote something down, and looked up. According to the report, the accident happened around 9:15 in the evening. The car went off a cliff and exploded. Inside, we found identification in Daniel's name. I frowned. My head was spinning. What car Daniel uses, the company shuttle? He doesn't drive. I remembered it perfectly. His company had vans for employees, and Daniel never liked to drive. He said the city traffic stressed him out, especially during rush hour. Miller turned a page in his notebook, his voice monotone. It was a rental car, rented through an app. We have confirmation it was rented at 7 o'clock tonight. I almost jumped up. My voice broke with anger and confusion. Impossible. Daniel was in a meeting all afternoon. He got home around 9. How could he rent a car at 7? I looked Miller straight in the eye as if hoping he would confirm it was all a terrible mistake. But he just remained silent for a few seconds, his gaze thoughtful. "We can request a DNA test if you have doubts," he said, his voice soft but firm. I nodded immediately without a second's hesitation. "I want to do it. I know my son. I'm sure something isn't right here." Inside me, a small flame of hope ignited. If it wasn't Daniel, then my son was still alive somewhere. But then the fear returned. If it wasn't him who had died, and why was Daniel's identification in that car? While Miller communicated with the coroner on his radio, I took my phone and dialed the number of Sarah, my daughter-in-law. I called once, no answer. The second time, just the dead tone. I called 5 more times, and with each call my heart beat faster, about to explode. Finally, I sent her a message, my hands trembling so much I misspelled some words. "Sarah, call me as soon as you can. Something very serious happened with Daniel." Miller returned, his voice serious. "We will do the DNA test tonight. Get some rest, ma'am. We will inform you of the results as soon as possible." I shook my head, my eyes burning. "I'll wait," I insisted. "I can't sleep without knowing where my son is." He looked at me with a flash of compassion, but said nothing more. He signaled to his partner to leave, leaving me alone in the cold living room. I got up, went to the kitchen, took a cloth, trying to do something to keep from going crazy. But my hands were shaking so much that the cloth fell to the floor. I picked it up and called Sarah again. Still no answer. The clock struck 2 in the morning when the doorbell rang again. I jumped up and ran to open it. It was Miller, his face grimmer than ever. He didn't beat around the bush. "Linda, the DNA results just came in. The body in the car does not share DNA with you. The deceased is not your son." I jumped to my feet. My legs were shaking so much I had to grab onto the armchair. "Then where is my son?" I asked. My voice broke in a mix of relief and terror. Relief because Daniel wasn't dead. Terror because if he wasn't, where had he gone? And why did he disappear? Miller put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently as if to give me strength. "As of now, we are officially opening a missing person investigation. We will check every lead. His phone, his bank accounts, the people he had contact with. Try to stay calm." But how could I stay calm? I looked at him, and the tears welled up. He's all I have. Daniel is everything to me. If something happens to him, I don't know how I could go on living. Miller nodded, his voice grave. I understand, Linda. We will do everything we can. He gave me a business card, asking me to call him if I remembered anything out of the ordinary. When he left, I stood in the middle of the living room, clutching the card so tightly I crumpled it. I looked towards the stairs, towards Daniel's room, which was still lit. I didn't know what was stalking my family, but a terrible feeling washed over me and squeezed my heart. Daniel didn't just disappear on his own. Someone was hiding something. I opened my eyes the next morning, the sunlight seeping through the curtains and illuminating the cold floor. I hadn't slept a wink all night. I just lay there staring at the ceiling while tears fell silently. I dragged my feet to the kitchen and made myself a cup of black coffee, just like I have every morning since Michael died. The steam from the cup brought back memories of past mornings when Daniel was a child and would sit at the table telling stories from school while nibbling on a sweet roll. Now the kitchen was empty, only the ticking of the clock and the bitter smell of coffee could be heard. I took my phone and checked again. No missed calls from Sarah. That seemed very strange to me. I searched the local news online trying to find information about the accident Miller mentioned last night. But there was nothing, not a single line. The unease grew like an icy wave that ran through my body. Could it all be a mistake? Or was there something bigger being hidden? At 7:45 sharp, the phone vibrated. It was Miller. His voice sounded graver, as if he were carrying a weight. Linda, we've just officially registered the case as a disappearance. We want to ask you more about Mr. Daniel's recent relationships. Could we see you this morning? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and said, Of course, come to my house. I'm here. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to miss the slightest chance that Daniel might suddenly return. Miller and his partner arrived at 8:30 with a folder and a laptop. They sat on the sofa. I served them water, trying to stay calm, even though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Miller opened his notebook, his gaze sharp, but his voice soft. Did you notice any strange behavior in Mr. Daniel lately? Anything, no matter how small, could help us. I took a deep breath, trying to sort through my fragmented memories. Daniel was very stressed about work. Lately he talked less, as if he were hiding something, but I thought it was just the pressure from the company. But Sarah, my daughter-in-law, she was acting strange. And Miller frowned, writing quickly. Strange how Linda... I hesitated for a moment. I didn't want to speak ill of my daughter-in-law, but the truth was the truth. They fought all the time. Sarah suspected Daniel was cheating on her with a secretary from the office, a woman named Lucy. I don't believe it. Daniel isn't like that. But Sarah... Sometimes she would leave the house at night without telling me or Daniel where she was going. Miller nodded, his voice calm. Has Sarah left home before, without notice? I nodded, lowering my voice. Yes, lately she said she was sleeping at the office. Once she didn't come back for several days. I remembered one night a few weeks ago when I went to Daniel and Sarah's house to bring them some food. I heard Sarah shouting from the bedroom. Do you think I'm stupid? That girl hangs all over you all day, and you act so innocent. Daniel's voice replied, tired but patient. Don't get ideas, Sarah. Lucy and I are just co-workers. I stayed outside, not wanting to get involved, but I felt my heart sink. Miller looked up from his notebook. Do you know where Lucy works, or do you have any information about her? I nodded, trying hard to remember. She works at Innovate Tech, Daniel's company. He's a project director there. Lucy is his secretary. I heard him mention her a couple of times, but just in passing. Miller immediately took out his phone and contacted the Human Resources Department at Innovate Tech. After a few minutes, he turned to me, his voice serious. Daniel didn't show up for work today. He didn't ask for leave. He didn't give any notice. I felt my heart tighten. Daniel didn't go to the company. So where had he gone? Miller continued. Do you have any recent photos of Sarah and Daniel? We want to pass them on to the search team. I stood up, my feet heavy, and walked to the bookshelf where I keep the family albums. I took out a photo from 3 weeks ago, where the three of us were standing in front of the house. Daniel had his arm around Sarah's shoulders, both smiling. I was in the middle, also smiling, but now that I looked at it, I noticed that Sarah's smile looked forced, as if she were hiding a secret. Miller took the photo, observing it attentively. "They look very happy," he said with a hint of sadness. I shook my head, a bitter taste in my mouth. Only on the outside. Inside, everything was mistrust. I told him more about Sarah's angry outbursts, the times Daniel came home with a tired look as if he were carrying the whole world on his shoulders. Miller took note of everything and stood up. "We're going to check the company first. We'll talk to Lucy and the others involved. You rest. We'll be in touch as soon as we have news." When the door closed, I stood in the doorway watching the patrol car disappear into the morning mist. My heart sank with a premonition that something very big was being hidden. The afternoon was just beginning. As I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee in my hands and my head in a mess, the phone vibrated and made me jump. It was Miller. His voice was brief but urgent. "Linda, we're at Innovate Tech. Would you like to come? There are some things we need you to hear directly." I didn't think twice, just replied, "I'm on my way." I quickly put on a clean blouse. I took my purse and called a taxi straight to Daniel's company. My heart pounded all the way, as if every turn of the wheels brought me closer to the truth, or to an even more terrifying secret. When the taxi stopped in front of the gleaming glass building of Innovate Tech, I felt a weight in my chest. This was the place where Daniel had spent almost 10 years of his life working to exhaustion to build his career. I entered the lobby, and the young receptionist looked up with a familiar smile. "Good morning, Linda. We didn't see Daniel come in today." Her voice was carefree, as if it were a casual conversation. I forced a smile and said calmly, "I'm here to clear up a couple of things." She nodded and showed me the way to the third-floor conference room where Miller was waiting for me. I walked down the hallway. The smell of cleaner and the hum of the air conditioning gave me a chill. Through the frosted glass of the conference room, I saw Miller talking to a young woman. I was afraid it was Lucy. She was hunched over in her chair, her shoulders slumped and her hands clutching the edge of the table. When Miller motioned for me to enter, I pushed the door open, trying to maintain my composure, despite the storm I felt inside. Lucy looked up. Her eyes met mine, and she quickly looked down as if she didn't dare to face me. Miller stood up and brought me a chair. "Linda, we'd like you to hear Lucy's side of the story if you agree." I nodded and sat down, clenching my hands to stop them from shaking. Lucy took a deep breath and began to speak in a trembling voice. "Linda, I apologize if my presence caused a misunderstanding between you and Daniel." She paused as if searching for words. I looked at her fixedly without saying anything, but my gaze surely said it all. I wanted the truth. Lucy began her story, her voice low but clear. She said she had admired Daniel for a long time, not just because he was her boss, but for his dedication and talent. "I sometimes tried to make small talk. I looked for excuses to stay late to work with him. A few times on purpose, I made people think there was something between Daniel and me, but he was always very professional. Once he called me to his office and told me directly that he only loved his wife and that he didn't want any more misunderstandings. He asked me to keep my distance." Lucy bowed her head and tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, ma'am." I didn't think things would go this far. I remained silent, feeling a huge weight in my chest. Daniel, always so proper, had tried to protect his family, but Lucy's foolishness had complicated everything. Miller turned to her, his voice calm but sharp. "Did Sarah know you were creating these misunderstandings?" Lucy nodded between sobs. "Once she found me talking alone with him in the hallway when she came to bring him food. I was just asking him about a project, but she looked at me with eyes like she wanted to hit me. She got very angry and left. I remembered the times Sarah came to my house frowning to tell me her suspicions about Daniel. 'Mom, he's changed,' she had told me once, her voice full of bitterness. 'He stays at the office late and that secretary is always with him.' I had tried to calm her, to tell her that Daniel was not a traitor. But now, sitting here listening to Lucy's confession, I realized that Sarah's suspicions were not entirely unfounded. They had just been exaggerated by the reckless actions of a young woman. Miller took notes carefully and then asked, "Do you know what happened to Daniel last night?" Lucy shook her head. her voice firm. "I was on duty on another floor. I haven't seen them since the afternoon." Miller nodded and indicated that Lucy could leave. She stood up, apologized to me one more time, and left. I said nothing, just followed her with my eyes, my heart heavy. Lucy might have been wrong, but she wasn't the main cause of Daniel's disappearance. There was something bigger, darker lurking. After the meeting, Miller invited me to a small cafe next to the office to continue talking. We sat in a secluded corner. The noise of the coffee machine and the smell of toasted bread made the atmosphere a little less tense. Miller looked at me and said in a low voice, "If what Lucy says is true, Daniel was never unfaithful, but Sarah was convinced he was." I nodded, a bitter taste in my mouth. Jealousy without reason is the poison of the soul. I remembered Daniel and Sarah's fights the nights she left home, the times Daniel came back with a tired look as if trying to keep everything from falling apart. Before we said goodbye, I took Miller's hand, my voice firm. "I don't know where my son is, but if he's alive, I'm going to find him." He nodded with an understanding look. "We will too, Linda. I promise we won't give up." We shook hands, and I left the cafe out onto the street, bathed in the afternoon sun. The leaves of the trees in front of the company swayed in the wind, but I felt no warmth. My heart was frozen, as if an invisible fear was strangling it. On the way home, I thought about Lucy's look, a mixture of shame and regret. She wasn't the biggest problem. The problem was Sarah and the doubts that had eaten away at her trust. If Sarah believed Daniel had betrayed her, what would she have been capable of doing to get revenge? 2 days had passed since Daniel's disappearance, but every second felt like an eternity. I would wake up early when the sunrise barely painted the old walls of my little house yellow. I would sit at the dining table looking at the empty chair where Daniel used to sit, my heart in a knot. On the table, his coffee cup was still there, with a dry stain on the rim. A small but painful trace that reminded me that my son had been here just a few days before. I touched the cup as if I could feel Daniel's warmth, but I only felt the cold of the porcelain. The phone vibrated, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Miller. His voice was grave and clear, as if he were trying to stay calm. "Linda, we want to ask you about properties, insurance policies, and other financial matters related to Mr. Daniel." "Could we see you today?" I was a little surprised, but immediately an old phrase of Sarah's echoed in my head like a stab. "If you died, at least you would leave me the $10 million from the insurance." At the time, I thought it was just something she said in anger, but now it sent a shiver down my spine. Had I overlooked a crucial clue? I stood up and walked to the small safe in the closet where Daniel kept his important papers. My hands trembled as I opened it and took out a folder. Inside, I found Daniel's life insurance policy, signed 2 years ago. I read every line, and my heart pounded when I saw the beneficiary's name, Sarah. The amount, $10 million. I clutched the paper, feeling it burn in my hands. Without hesitation, I called Miller. "Lieutenant, I found Daniel's insurance policy. The beneficiary is Sarah. You need to see this." Less than an hour later, Miller and a colleague, a financial specialist named Chloe, arrived at my house. They sat in the living room carefully reviewing the contract. Chloe flipped through the pages. Her voice was monotone but sharp. "Insured sum of $10 million. Payable in case of accidental death. The contract is very clear." Miller looked at me, his expression serious. "If this was a setup, the first beneficiary is the one who collects the insurance." His words were like a hammer blow to the head. Sarah. Could she be involved? I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fit, and each one made my heart sink. I clenched my hands, my voice trembling. "I want you to go ask the insurance company. Maybe Sarah has already shown her face. I need to know what she's done." Miller nodded and signaled for Chloe to get ready. "Do you want to come with us?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want to hear everything with my own ears." I couldn't stay at home waiting anymore. Daniel was my son, and I needed the truth no matter how painful. The insurance company was in a modern glass building in the business district, half an hour from my house. When we entered, the receptionist smiled kindly and guided us to the 5th floor. A middle-aged man who introduced himself as Sebastian Evans, the area manager, received us in a small office overlooking the busy street. He checked some files on his computer and then looked up, his voice calm. "Yes, Mrs. Sarah came to this office on Monday to ask about the procedures for claiming Mr. Daniel's life insurance." I felt my blood run cold. Monday. That was the day before Daniel disappeared. I immediately asked, my voice breaking, "Did she come alone?" Sebastian frowned, typed something else, and turned the screen towards us. The image from the security camera appeared. Sarah, wearing a white blouse and sunglasses, entered with a tall man in a gray suit. He was slightly turned away, but I saw how he put his hand on her shoulder as if comforting or guiding her. Miller motioned for me to give him the photo of Daniel. I took it out of my bag and placed it on the desk. Sebastian shook his head instantly. "It's not this person. The man accompanying Mrs. Sarah was not Mr. Daniel." My heart skipped a beat. If it wasn't Daniel, who was it? Miller asked for the security camera photo to be printed as evidence. When they gave it to me, I took it with trembling hands. The man's face in the photo was blurry, but something about him seemed familiar. I looked closer, and suddenly, like a flash of lightning, I recognized him. I pointed to the photo, my voice trembling but sure. "I know this man. His name is Julian Herrera. He is my son's biggest business rival." Miller turned to look at me, his eyes like daggers. "Are you sure?" I nodded, and the memories came flooding back. Daniel had told me about Julian, a fierce competitor in the construction sector. He had tried to buy Innovate Tech, but Daniel refused. Once Daniel came home very tense and told me, "Mom, Julian Herrera is not a good person. He plays dirty and I have to be careful." At the time, I thought it was just work stuff. But now, seeing him in that photo with Sarah, an icy fear ran down my spine. Miller clenched his fists, his voice determined. "We could be dealing with a conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm going to have the investigation team look into Julian Herrera immediately." He turned to Chloe and ordered her to analyze the bank accounts and transactions of Sarah and Julian. Then he looked at me, his voice softer. "Linda, you've done a great job, but I need you to stay calm. We are getting closer to the truth." As I left the insurance company, I walked out onto the street. The midday sun was bright, but it couldn't dispel the cold I felt inside. I said to Miller in a low voice full of doubt, "If Daniel were behind this as you suspected, he wouldn't be foolish enough to talk to me and have the car explode at the same time. And if he planned it, why didn't he come here with Sarah?" Miller nodded with a thoughtful look. "You're right. Something doesn't add up. We're going to investigate it." On the way home, sitting in the taxi, I looked out the window without seeing anything. The image of Sarah and Julian on the security camera tormented me. Could Sarah, my daughter-in-law, whom I once considered a daughter, have betrayed Daniel and Julian? What did he want, the insurance money or revenge on Daniel for his business failures? Did Daniel even know about Sarah and Julian's plan? Did he disappear on purpose to protect me or to save himself? The next morning, just as the sun was rising, the phone rang. I answered immediately. It was Miller. His voice was brief but sharp. "Linda, we verified the information on Julian Herrera. Can you come to the station right now? There are some things you need to see." I quickly put on a light sweater, went out to the street, and took a taxi to the station. In the car, I clutched my purse, my heart in a knot. When I entered Miller's office, he was already sitting at his desk with a thick folder in front of him. He slid it towards me, his voice grave. "Julian Herrera, CEO of Herrera Solutions, a direct competitor of Daniel's Innovate Tech. They have competed for 3 major projects in the last 2 years, and there are rumors that Julian tried to play dirty, even bribing investors to win contracts." I reviewed the folder, and my eyes stopped on Julian's photo. His face was cold, his eyes sharp as knives. I pointed to the photo, my voice trembling. "It's him. He's the same man I saw on a video call with Sarah." I remembered that afternoon perfectly. Sarah had come home with a cake box, but she was restless, checking her phone every few moments. When I asked, she said it was work, but I overheard a man's voice and the name Julian. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now it all made sense. Miller nodded, his gaze more piercing. We had a team track Sarah's cell phone. The signal was detected in Maplewood, a nearby town, around 4 in the morning after the accident. I felt my heart sink. Maplewood. What was Sarah doing there, and why did she disappear right after sending the message saying Daniel was hurt? Miller continued. We sent an undercover team to the area of the last signal. After 2 days of surveillance, they discovered Sarah living in a house on the outskirts of Maplewood with a man. He paused, looking at me as if to prepare me. We've confirmed that man is Julian Herrera. Several neighbors in the area say they act like husband and wife. Very affectionate, they go to the market together, even kiss in the street. I stood there paralyzed, as if my blood had stopped flowing. Sarah and Julian living as husband and wife. While Daniel, my son, was missing, possibly in danger, I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms until it hurt. Miller passed me a stack of photos taken from a distance. Sarah and Julian hand in hand coming out of a small store. Sarah's smile in the photo sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the smile of a wife worried about her husband. It was the smile of someone hiding something. Miller continued. We reviewed videos from neighbors' cameras near the accident scene. A clip from a house across the street shows Sarah near the location just a few hours before the car exploded. He opened his laptop and showed me the video. Under the dim light of a streetlight, I clearly saw Sarah wearing the blue jacket I had washed for her last week. She was walking quickly, looking around as if she feared being seen. My heart was about to burst out of my chest. It's her, I whispered, my voice breaking. That jacket, I washed it for her. Miller nodded, his voice firm. This evidence is enough to confirm that Sarah not only knew about the accident, but was at the scene. I clenched my fists. Tears welled up, but I held them back. In my mind, there was no doubt anymore. Sarah didn't just know she had planned it, but why Miller gave orders to his team, his voice cautious. Don't approach yet. Keep watching. We need to know what they're hiding. I looked at him, my voice trembling. What if they have Daniel locked up? What if they have him somewhere? Miller didn't answer immediately, but his gaze darkened, as if he too were thinking the worst. We are considering all possibilities, Linda. Tonight, the team will be stationed around the house in Maplewood to monitor every move. I nodded, but inside, fear had turned into a storm. If Daniel was alive, if they had him kidnapped, every minute that passed was a minute I would not forgive myself for not having found him sooner. Miller put a hand on my shoulder, his voice soft. Linda, I know this is very difficult, but you have to be strong. We are doing everything we can. I looked at him, and tears rolled down my cheeks. He's all I have, Lieutenant. Daniel is everything to me. If something happens to him, I don't know how I could go on living. As I left the station, I walked out onto the street. The sky was clouding over, reflecting my mood. I arrived home, pushed the door open, and the silence seemed terrifying. I stood in front of the small altar in a corner where I have a photo of Michael and a crucifix. I lit a candle. The smoke rose slowly, carrying my prayer with it. Honey, I know you're alive. I'm going to find you, and whether it's Sarah or whoever, I'm going to bring it to light. I knelt, clutching my rosary as my tears fell to the floor, but inside me a flame of determination began to burn. 3 days had passed since the police confirmed that Sarah was living with Julian in Maplewood. They hadn't acted yet. Early in the morning, the doorbell rang. It was Miller. He came in with a thick folder, his eyes full of determination, but also with a trace of fatigue. He put the folder on the table, his voice grave. Linda, these are the photos the surveillance team took in Maplewood. I opened the folder, my heart pounding. The first photo left me frozen. Sarah, in a thin nightgown, came out onto the balcony of the house and gave Julian a cup of coffee. He hugged her, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and they both laughed like a happy couple. I started to tremble, pointed at the photo, my voice breaking. She was in my house calling me Mom. How could she do this? Miller put a hand on the table, his gaze as cold as steel. We need to know if they have Daniel kidnapped. Do you remember any place that Sarah or Julian frequented? Any unusual place that might be related? I took a deep breath, searching my memories. Suddenly, a conversation from a month ago appeared in my mind. Sarah was in my kitchen talking on the phone in a low voice. "Okay, Julian, tonight, I'll pick up the van to take the things to the abandoned cabin on the outskirts." At the time, I thought she was joking, or it was something for work. But now that phrase was like a light in the darkness. I looked at Miller, my voice trembling. "There's a place, an abandoned wooden cabin about 45 minutes from the city near the old pine forest. Sarah mentioned it once when talking to Julian." Miller sat up straight, immediately taking notes. "Do you know the exact location?" I nodded, describing it in detail. "It's a dirt road near a wooden bridge that crosses a stream. The cabin is hidden behind some big pine trees." "No one has lived there in years." Miller didn't hesitate, took out his radio, and ordered the surveillance team to expand the search radius in that direction. In the afternoon, Miller called again, his voice more urgent. "Linda, we've just detected the signal of an old van with fake plates. This vehicle appeared near the accident scene. With satellite data, we confirmed that it stopped near the cabin you described." I felt my heart stop. The abandoned cabin. Could Daniel be there? I clutched the rosary in my hand, trying to stay calm. "What are you going to do?" I asked, trembling. Miller replied, "We've already sent a special operations group dressed in civilian clothes to inspect. Another team is still watching the house in Maplewood." Time passed with unbearable slowness. Every minute was an hour. I sat in the living room clutching my rosary, my eyes fixed on the clock. I prayed, whispering to myself, "Daniel, you're alive, right? I'm coming for you, my son." Around midnight, the phone vibrated. It was Miller. "Linda, we just saw Sarah and Julian get into a car and leave Maplewood. They're heading straight for the cabin." I jumped up, my heart racing. "I want to go," I said without thinking. Miller hesitated. "Linda, it's very dangerous. Let us handle it." But I insisted. "I have to know if my son is there. I won't do anything foolish, but I have to go." Finally, Miller agreed. He picked me up in a silver van with no police logos. We drove on dark roads, the headlights illuminating rows of towering pine trees. As we approached the cabin, Miller told me to stay still in the car while he and his team got closer. Over the radio, I heard his broken voice. "A light just came on. There are people inside." I clutched the rosary with all my strength. I felt like my heart was going to break. "Daniel, are you there?" the team reported. Through a crack, they saw Daniel, my son, gaunt with his hands tied, lying on the cold wooden floor. Sarah and Julian entered with a tray of food and a bottle of water. Sarah put the tray on the floor. Her voice was icy. "Just a few more days. As soon as the insurance money is in the account, we're out of here to live like kings. By then, you'll be free, my love." Julian laughed and gave Daniel a little kick. "Your mom must be crying her eyes out, right? All according to plan." I heard those words over the radio, and tears welled up, but not of sorrow. It was rage, a fire that ignited inside me. Daniel was alive, but they had him kidnapped, treated like a hostage by the same woman he loved. I wanted to run out, but Miller motioned for me to be quiet. He took his radio, his voice firm. "We have enough evidence. Go in now." 4 police officers in bulletproof vests stormed the cabin through the front and back doors almost simultaneously. There was a crash, a quick and controlled chaos. Over the radio, I heard Julian shout, then a dull thud as they took him down and his head hit a table. Sarah screamed, terrified. "What are you doing? Let me go!" I wanted to run over there, but an officer stopped me, his voice stern. "Linda, please stay here. We'll get Daniel out shortly." I stood there trembling, my eyes glued to the old wooden door. Then I heard Daniel's voice, weak but clear. "Where's my mom? Is she okay?" His words pierced my heart. He was worried about me even in the midst of his own hell. Miller answered in a reassuring voice. "We're here now." "Your mom is waiting outside." I couldn't hold back anymore. I opened the car door and ran towards the cabin, ignoring the officer's warning look. I needed to see Daniel. I needed to know he was alive. When I entered, Miller was helping Daniel up, cutting the rope from his hands. Daniel was gaunt, pale, with red eyes, but they lit up when they saw me. "Mom," he whispered, his voice almost gone. I knelt and hugged him with all my strength, crying uncontrollably. "Daniel, I'm here. I found you." He hugged me back. His trembling hands clung to my shoulders. "I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered in my ear, his voice choked. I held him tighter, as if I were afraid that if I let him go, he would disappear again. The ambulance arrived shortly after. The paramedics checked Daniel, bandaging the wounds on his wrists and ankles. I sat by his side, holding his hand, not taking my eyes off him for a second. Daniel looked at me and smiled weakly. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't want you to worry. I was just trying to keep you safe." I shook my head and the tears started to flow again. "You're so silly, Daniel. I'm your mother. I'm supposed to protect you." He nodded, but his eyes were full of pain, as if he blamed himself for letting things get so far. At the station, they took Sarah and Julian to separate interrogation rooms. Miller invited me to witness, but I could only watch from behind a one-way mirror. Sarah sat there, her head bowed, silent as a statue. Miller began the interrogation, his voice calm but sharp. "Mrs. Fernandez, the DNA test showed that the body from the accident was not Daniel's. Do you have anything to say?" Sarah didn't answer, but I saw her shoulders tremble. Her lawyer sitting beside her whispered something, but suddenly she raised her head, her eyes bloodshot. "Okay," she said, her voice broken. "I'll confess everything." Sarah's confession was another stab in my heart. She said that at first her plan with Julian was to kill Daniel to collect the insurance, but when it came time to do it, she didn't have the courage. Instead, they put sleeping pills in his drink. When he was drowsy, Julian snuck into the house, carried him to his car, and took him to the cabin to hold him captive. Meanwhile, Sarah went to the accident scene and burned the rental car with the body of a homeless man Julian had gotten from an underground morgue. They chose the night to avoid being seen, and the plan was almost perfect until I insisted that I had spoken with Daniel just before the accident. That one detail brought everything crashing down. Miller kept pressing, and the police found more evidence. A file on Julian's laptop with the detailed step-by-step plan to fake the accident and collect the insurance. They also found a dash cam they had removed and hidden in Sarah's bag, which recorded her putting the body in the car before setting it on fire. Additionally, the paperwork to claim the insurance was already prepared, just waiting for confirmation of Daniel's death. Every detail was a blow to me. Sarah, whom I considered family, had coldly planned to harm my son. Standing behind the mirror, I looked at Sarah. She was no longer the young woman I knew, the one who brought dessert to the house and laughed cheerfully. Now her head was bowed, her eyes lifeless, as if she had lost her soul. I felt no pity, only disappointment and pain. How can a person change so much? How could she betray Daniel, betray me, just for money, and for a man like Julian Miller? Approached, his voice grave. "Linda, thanks to your clear-headedness and your insistence, we saved a life. If you hadn't been so sure that Daniel was still alive, we would have missed that cabin." I looked at him, my voice trembling but full of pride. "No one knows their son like a mother. If I didn't believe he was alive, who else would?" Miller nodded, a glint of respect in his eyes. "You are a very strong mother, Linda. Daniel is lucky to have you." After leaving the station, I went back to the hospital where Daniel was being treated. He was lying down, his face still pale, but less tense. I sat by his side and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his slender fingers. "Mom," Daniel said hoarsely, "I didn't know Sarah was capable of something like this. I tried to protect her, to keep everything from breaking. But I was wrong." I stroked his hair, and the tears started to fall again. "You weren't wrong, Daniel. You just believed in love. But I'm here now, and I'm not going to let you suffer again." The doctor said Daniel would need time to recover both physically and emotionally. The wounds on his body would heal, but those in his soul would need much more. I looked at my son, my heart broken, but full of hope. We had come out of the darkness, and I knew that even though the road ahead would be difficult, I would always be by his side. 2 weeks after Daniel's rescue, I woke up with a mix of relief and heaviness. Daniel was home, but the scars on his body and in his soul were still there, reminding us of everything we had been through. Today was the first hearing at the criminal court in Oak Creek. I put on the blue sweater Daniel once gave me, took his hand, and together with Miller and our lawyer, we entered the courtroom. Daniel was still weak and used a cane, but he insisted on being present. "Mom, I have to face them." he told me, his voice firm, though his eyes still showed pain. I nodded, squeezing his hand, promising myself to always be with him. We sat in the third row, close enough to see the defendant's bench clearly. When they brought in Sarah and Julian Herrera, I felt my heart sink. They wore gray prison uniforms, handcuffed with their heads bowed. Sarah looked up for a moment, and her gaze met mine. She blinked several times, her face pale as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. I looked away. I didn't want that look to soften me. The prosecutor stood up, his voice echoing in the silent room. Today we are trying the defendants, Sarah and Julian Herrera, on charges of attempted murder, insurance fraud, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. The large screen in the courtroom lit up, showing irrefutable evidence. The security camera video showing Sarah near the accident, the photos of her and Julian at the insurance company, and the audio recorded in the cabin where Sarah coldly told Daniel her plan to collect the insurance. Every image, every sound was like a knife in my heart, but I stood tall, strong for Daniel. The medical examiner took the stand and confirmed that the body from the accident was that of a homeless man who had died of natural causes before being placed in the car. The insurance company representative also testified, stating that Sarah had initiated the process to collect $10 million with her signature clearly visible. I listened to every word with immense pain. How could someone plan something so meticulously to harm the person they once swore to love? When the prosecutor called Daniel to testify, I felt his hand tremble in mine. He stood up slowly, leaning on his cane, and walked to the stand, pale, but with a firm gaze. After dinner that night, Daniel began in a hoarse voice, I felt a very heavy sleepiness, something strange, abnormal. I remember lying down in bed, and then I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was tied up in a cold, closed room. I heard Sarah laughing and saying I should just die already. His voice broke, and the entire courtroom fell silent. I clenched my fists, holding back tears. Daniel sat down with sweat on his forehead, and I gently wiped it away, whispering, "You did very well, honey." The trial lasted almost the whole day, each minute heavier than the last. At the end, the judge allowed the defendants to give their final words. Sarah stood up, her eyes red and her voice trembling. I lost my mind. When I thought Daniel was cheating on me, I felt so much pain, so much jealousy that I broke down. Julian showed up and told me he understood me better than anyone. I listened to him. I agreed to plan that horrible thing. But I didn't have the courage to kill anyone. I just wanted Daniel to suffer like I suffered. But I was wrong. She lowered her head, and her tears fell to the floor, but I no longer felt any compassion. Her apology couldn't erase the days I lived with the fear of losing my son. Julian, on the other hand, remained silent. He sat there with a cold gaze, admitting no guilt, no remorse. But the evidence was overwhelming. The file on his laptop, the hidden dash cam in Sarah's bag, the ready insurance papers. There was no way he could deny it. The judge looked at them both, his voice stern. Based on the evidence and testimonies, the court delivers its sentence. Sarah, 16 years in prison with mitigating factors for her confession and for not causing a death. Julian Herrera, 25 years in prison with aggravating factors for being the mastermind for his coldness and for trying to conceal the crime. I didn't cry. I just looked at Sarah one last time, thinking a monster doesn't always need a knife. Sometimes it just needs a heart, without trust and without reason. When they took her away, her gaze passed over me, but I didn't return it. I turned to Daniel, took his hand, and felt the warmth of his slender fingers. "Let's go, honey," I said softly. "Let's go home." As we left the courthouse, Miller walked beside me, his voice grave. "Linda, this case is over, but I know that what you and Daniel went through will not be easy to forget." I nodded, looking at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Without you and your team, I don't know if I would have found my son." Miller smiled, his gaze warm. "You were the one who guided us to the truth, Linda. A mother's love is the greatest force I have ever witnessed. When we got home, I took Daniel to the living room where the afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the family photo on the shelf. Daniel sat on the sofa, looked at the photo, and said in a hoarse voice, "Mom, I thought I'd never come back here." I sat next to him, stroking his hair like when he was a child. "You're home now, Daniel, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again." He nodded, his eyes red, but a faint smile began to form. That night, I made the beef stew that Daniel loved so much, the same one I was cooking when it all began. We sat at the table, just the two of us, but this time without fear or doubt. Daniel ate slowly, looking at me from time to time, as if to make sure I was still there. "Mom," he said softly, "I promise I won't hide anything from you again. I was wrong to try to solve everything on my own." I smiled and put my hand on his. "And I promise you too, Daniel. I will always be here no matter what." A month after the trial, Daniel's life and mine were beginning to find a new rhythm, though the wounds inside us were still there, deep and painful. Every morning I would wake up early, make coffee, and sit by the window watching the sun filter through the trees in the yard. My little house didn't feel so silent anymore. The sound of Daniel turning the pages of a book in the living room, the noise of his small shovel as he tended the backyard garden, it was all like a soft music that soothed my heart. Daniel hadn't gone back to the company yet. He said he needed time to find himself again. I let him do what he wanted, but always by his side, cooking his favorite dishes, washing his clothes, and talking when he needed it. I didn't pressure him to talk about what happened, but every time I looked into his eyes, I saw a deep sadness, as if he blamed himself. I could only take his hand and say softly, "Everything will be okay, honey. I'm here." One morning while I was hanging clothes in the yard, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on my apron, opened the door, and saw Lucy. She was wearing a white blouse and holding a small paper bag. Her gaze was shy. "Linda," she said. Her voice choked. "I came to apologize. I know I was partly to blame for all this. If it hadn't been for my immature actions at the beginning, maybe Sarah wouldn't have misunderstood things, and none of this would have gone so far." She lowered her head, and tears rolled down her cheeks. I looked at her with a mixture of forgiveness and painful memories. Finally, I sighed and said softly, "Lucy, sometimes a look at the wrong moment can tear a home apart, but at least you didn't cross the line. You recognized your mistake, and that's the most important thing." Lucy looked up, and a little hope shone in her eyes. She handed me an envelope. "This is my resignation letter. I don't want people to think I'm staying at Innovate Tech for personal reasons. I need to leave so things can heal." I took the envelope and looked her in the eyes. Although Lucy had made a mistake, she was young and repentant. I approached her, hugged her tightly, and whispered, "Thank you for your honesty. I wish you find a new path that makes you happy." Lucy smiled weakly, nodded, and left. When her figure disappeared at the end of the street, I felt a little relief. Not everyone has the courage to face their mistakes. A week later, Daniel decided to go back to Innovate Tech. I worried, fearing the work would exhaust him, but he smiled and said, "Mom, I need to work. I need to prove that I'm stronger after what happened." The day he returned, I stood outside the office watching Daniel walk in. The entire staff stood up and applauded him. Daniel raised his hand, smiled slightly, but I saw a new determination in his eyes. After that, he reorganized the entire company, cutting all ties with Herrera Solutions. He created an internal transparency and ethics committee supervised by himself. "I want Innovate Tech to be a clean place, Mom," he told me that night. "No more conspiracies, no more dirty games." One afternoon, Miller came to visit me. He brought a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, the flowers I once told him I liked. He sat on the sofa, looked around the little house, and said, "Linda, the police work with the law, but you work with a mother's intuition. Both are necessary, and I truly admire you." I smiled, accepting the flowers with a warm heart. "Thank you, Lieutenant, but I'm just a mother doing what a mother has to do." Miller nodded, his gaze full of respect. "You are an extraordinary mother, Linda. Daniel is proof of that." After Miller left, I sat at the table and opened Michael's old journal. I turned the pages, rereading what he wrote about his dreams, about our family, about Daniel. I took a pen and began to write my own story from that fateful night. They told me Daniel had an accident, to the painful days searching for the truth, and finally the day I got my son back. I wrote slowly, each word a way of releasing repressed emotions. At the end, I wrote jealousy and betrayal turn people into monsters, but justice and a mother's love will never be defeated. When I finished, I closed the journal and placed it on the small altar next to Michael's photo. I lit a candle, which carried away my whisper. "Michael, do you see our son made it through? I kept my promise to you." I turned around and saw Daniel standing in the doorway looking at me with eyes full of love. "Mom, I want to cook today," he said softly. "Let me take care of you like you took care of me." We went into the kitchen together, the sound of knives mixing with Daniel's laughter. The little house was filled with warmth again, like in the old days. I looked at my son, my heart flooded with joy and hope. We had come through the darkness, and now the light was returning. Daniel is all I have, and I know that no matter what the future brings, our love as mother and son will always be a flame that will never go out. After everything that happened, the biggest lesson I want to share with you who have listened to my story up to this moment is this. A mother's love and faith in justice are stronger than any conspiracy. Jealousy, greed, or betrayal can make people lose their minds. But if we stand firm, seeking the truth and believing in love in the end, light will always overcome darkness. I want everyone to understand that even in the most desperate moments, you should never give up hope and trust, because that perseverance can save a life, protect a family, and prove that justice does exist. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes, I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace?